The voice of sharing, Durian ASEAN.
ASEAN Dailies. First and foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. You are at Durian ASEAN and also the ASEAN Dailies with Grace.
Hi, this is Gowri.
So, yes, Gowri, let's talk about what's been happening in Malaysia. Well, just one after the other after haze. Well, now we are very worried about this typhoid outbreak in KL especially. And about 32 people are down with this typhoid disease.
That's right. And like you mentioned, the haze itself is not over yet. Yesterday and today was really, really bad.
Yep.
You can barely see anything outside.
Exactly.
And before that could even end, doesn't look like it's going to end soon anyway.
Yeah.
And we already have an outbreak of typhoid. Started with about 7 cases that were reported first week of August, but it didn't really gain much attention until as of Sunday we've had 32 new cases, and now it's been receiving attention from a lot of parties. A lot of people are starting to freak out, starting to get paranoid.
Exactly.
And according to the statement released by the ministry, 2 or more persons who came into contact with the 7 people were said to have tested positive for the disease in the following week, but they have been given the relevant medical treatment.
Apparently, this disease is pretty contagious. So for those who are affected already, and if you share the same drinks or food, you are highly to get the disease as well from those people. So all those symptoms start with a very bad stomach ache, fever, and a bit of like vomiting symptoms, and after that it gets worse. So please be careful, avoid going outside, especially to Mamak area, especially when it comes to drinking with ice, because it all starts from the ice cubes. So please be careful with that, because apparently more people are reported to be affected by diseases.
Right. And the ministry will also be carrying out tests on factories that supply all these ice blocks to restaurants to make sure that they maintain the quality and their hygiene as well in their products, because severe cases of typhoid fever can actually lead to brain malfunction. That's quite an extreme thing, and also it can also damage your intestines. They start bleeding. Adults can have constipation, and younger children usually have diarrhea when it comes to typhoid. So like you said, I think we should avoid ice cubes as for now until the ministry finish up their investigation and make sure that it's all clean and good.
After all, right, I think we really need to know where it started. I mean, people just go to Mamak or any shops nearby and then drink all those ice drinks. But after that, they are the ones who got all these diseases. But there should be a reason why. And then perhaps all those manufacturers, ice cubes that you mentioned, we need to really do some proper investigation on that and then see which company or who caused this to spread this disease. And apparently this is pretty severe. As much as it may sound quite rare to all this public, but then once you get it, it gets really, really painful.
Yes, and I think a lot of Malaysians don't really care where the ice cubes come from anyway. I mean, we know that they come in bulk and it's just there in your drink, but we don't really think too much about where is it stored or how was this produced, because we just want to have our ice drinks. And I think that's probably something that we should start being careful about as well, because when something is mass produced, it's quite difficult to maintain a certain standard and to make sure that it's clean and it's produced properly and it's not really exposed to any harmful bacteria or anything.
Well, at the same time, haze is not over yet. So let's prevent ourselves from getting sick from haze as well. Well, you mentioned about the Malaysians really don't care where the ice cubes are from, or even the drinking all these ice drinks from outside. Now really need to be cautious. But also when it comes to haze, we really urge people to buy proper mask to wear outside and prevent yourself from getting all these diseases or these symptoms.
Exactly. I think there's been some cases of people contracting bronchitis as well, and also getting asthma attacks. And that's because the haze has gotten so bad. And I think it's really time for us to start taking it seriously and not just brush it off as it's going to go away, because it's not. I think experts have also reported that it will probably stay until January 2016.
Oh no, that's too long, Gowri.
And you know what? I actually like to chew on ice cubes, and I'm pretty scared now.
Yeah, you better now go outside and then get all these ice drinks, Gowri. Right, so we'll take a very short break, and when we come back, we'll discuss more on the political side of Southeast Asia. So stay tuned.
ASEAN Dailies. First and foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Driana ASEAN, the voice of discovery, and sharing your at ASEAN Dailies with Grace.
And you're with Gowri.
Right, let's talk about politics in Malaysia first. So apparently in Malaysia, the oppositions, they are moving against our Prime Minister, which is the delay to next parliament sessions.
And what happened was they were supposed to have a no confidence motion as planned by the Malaysians opposition alliance against our PM, of course, Najib Razak.
Yeah.
But it will not be heard by the current session of the parliament, according to the Speaker of the House, who said that on Tuesday. And I think this kind of drew a bit of a reaction on Facebook as well, because a lot of people were like, why would you even go to the parliament if you're not going to say anything or explain anything? And of course, this came in line with the whole 1MDB scandal, the financial management that involved our Prime Minister, and we have debts of amounting to 11 billion US dollars. And the fund, whose board advisor is chaired by Najib himself, is being investigated not only in Malaysia but in several countries as well, and I think the US being one of them. So the Speaker has actually moved the motion to be filed 14 days before a parliament session convened in order to be heard. And because this year's final session began on Monday, it runs until December 3rd. So we will not be hearing anything about this until December 3rd at least. And this newly formed opposition alliance, Pakatan Harapan, is led by Aziza Wan Ismail, who is the wife of our opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim.
Well, when it comes to 1MDB, it's not just the local issues anymore. Like you mentioned, it's being investigated by many other countries, and it is quite shameful that this issue, when it comes to money, it is being studied by many other countries, and yet our Prime Minister is in his denial and giving a lot of other reasons to back his reasons, and that doesn't look very professional, and also there's no transparency at all. And of course, all these opposition leaders, they're seeking for this truth, and also as well as for us, for Najib's the truth speech to the public about this 1MDB. And that's what we are all waiting for, to be honest.
And I think he actually made it worse when he reshuffled the cabinet and also replaced the Attorney General in charge of an investigation into 1MDB, and that sort of further ruined his reputation as bad as it already was. Because like you said, what the people were looking for was the truth, and in times of that, anyone who was speaking up against 1MDB just gets fired, or they get sacked and they get replaced in the cabinet, or even when it comes to our Attorney General. And however, I think we are having a lot of groups who are not giving up, and I think our opposition being one of them. And it's not so much about who's right or who's wrong, but I think that when there is a scandal and there are investigations ongoing, I think it's good to have our opposition party sort of pressuring them, so the investigations can keep going and doesn't stop. And we don't want to wake up one day and like, hey, what happened to this 1MDB thing? We still don't know like what happened to the investigation. And I think because a lot of other countries are also involved and also carrying out their own investigations into this, that makes it even more for Malaysians to want to know what's really up with this.
So we hope to hear, well, looks like we cannot hear anything on until the 3rd of December.
Yeah.
So, but then hope that we're still waiting and we're still hoping for it. So let's hope for at least a little bit of positive news from the government.
Right.
Well, let's move on to the other country, which is Vietnam. We just talk about the religious conflict which happened in Indonesia, Aceh, yesterday. But this is another one that in Vietnam that is regarding the religious freedom, and that's also being abused at the risk of increasing even more. So it is the 5th draft version of this legislation, and also the finalization follows the concerns expressed by all these religious leaders that Vietnamese population will be subject to increasing this restriction.
And of course, we are referring to the law on belief and religion. Can you imagine having a law on belief and religion?
Exactly.
And it could be finalized this month in Vietnam. And that's what most people are fearing. They are fearing that Vietnam could be at risk of greater restrictions than what they already have at the moment. And I think of course, it's very tough when you have a legislation on something that is so subjective. I mean, when you talk about faith, when you talk about belief, these are not things that are tangible. These are not things that you can measure. It's up to you. It's your own personal relationship. It's something very personal as well. But it may actually, following the publication of the 4th draft of the law, the Interfaith Council of Vietnam actually wrote a letter insisting that this legislation should not be written by an atheist government and officials without religious experience. And I think that's absolutely true. And the council also said that the wording of the law was too ambiguous, leaving room for a lot of errors that could take place. It could be easily twisted by the local authorities, and this can also cause prevention of religious practice and help a lot of officials to commit bribery, according to the council.
Of course, when especially religion is converted into law, right? It is all mostly man-made ones, and of course there will be a lot of restrictions, a lot of things that people cannot do and can do. And like I mentioned before, when it comes to religion, it's all about the personal belief. It has to be personalized, and it's about how you want to follow your belief, but not by set of rules or restriction, even policies done by the government or higher authorities, which sound a bit unfair, but it looks like it's increasing the amount and also the rate of abusing this religious freedom in Vietnam.
Right, and Vietnam's constitution actually does guarantee the freedom of religion for everybody, but the example here given is China, where this communist government tightly controls independent religious practice. And according to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, it represses individuals and religious groups as it views as challenging its authority. This is including independent Buddhists and a few other religions that they have in Vietnam. And it seems that last week, Vietnam also condemned the U.S. State Department's latest annual report in line with the International Religious Freedom Report, where their foreign ministry said that the report continued to make unobjective assessments and cited erroneous information on Vietnam. So I think what the U.S. is trying to do is to make sure that Vietnam does live up to its words. If you guarantee your people the freedom of religion, then leave it at that. Don't come up with a legislation to control that and to restrict people's beliefs.
So we hope to see more, continuous improvement when it comes to religious freedom, and also hope that it comes to the end to all this harassment as well as abusing all this religious freedom in Vietnam. So let's move on to Myanmar this time. So apparently Myanmar is to allow EU election observers into military bases, and Myanmar is having this very historical moment soon in November.
Definitely. And it's coming up real soon. It's actually November 8th, which is in about 2 weeks' time. And of course, before this, they announced that they are having these EU observers in the country who will not meddle with anything, but they are merely there as observers to see how the election is taking place. And it seems now that they are allowed into the military bases itself. And when it comes to Myanmar, the election, an official said actually that this move could bolster oversight of a poll billed as the country's fairest indicates. So what they're saying is that by letting these observers in, it could actually ensure a better, a clearer, fairer election. And we're not too sure how that's going to happen, because we know that Myanmar itself is controlled by the military mostly, and it also has one of the largest armies in the world, and a quarter of the seats is reserved for the military, which is what they are trying to get away from. And tens and thousands of soldiers are actually expected to take part in voting at this military bases before the November 8th general election.
Well, when you talk about the elections, right, a lot of politicians, of course, they like to talk about transparency, as well as accuracy, as well as how they will be, they will ask for vote from the public. And of course here, as expected, the decision is going to make the vote more transparent and also the report more accurate as well. And then, but Myanmar is still in the military system. It's having the transition to go to democratic system, but it's not gonna be easy. They really need to have a proper leader to hold and also be firm about the system, and also hold regulation throughout the country. So this marks the really, really important day in Myanmar. And of course, at the press conference in Yangon, U.S. expressed concern that there was an extreme language. They also aim at the religious minorities, and that also could be potentially establishing towards the nation, the election point as well. So Myanmar has a lot of internal problems still within the nation. So those are the things that the country really needs to look at, and the one leader really need to be able to observe as well as come up with a better solution for the nation.
I think what's interesting to note is back in 1990, during their general election, the opposition side actually won it. Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, of course, the NLD. But the countries, because the military was so powerful, they just ignored the election. They just ignored the result of the election, and they continued to stay in power still. And they did not acknowledge the fact that the opposition has won the election. So I think that's one of the things that they have to be very careful about right now, as much as they want to break away. And NLD so far is making a lot of major gains. It's quite popular. The campaigning is popular. They are expected to actually gain a lot of votes, but eventually will people be able to accept it if NLD wins? Will they be able to make that whole transformation, or will they still want to hold on to that, to what they're already used to?
Exactly. So we hope for the really positive news from Myanmar, but all the best to the election, which is coming up very, very soon. Well, before we end our political news, let's talk about Thailand. And Thailand, apparently they also planned to have a new military unit to curb this online dissent. So this is according to the Defense Minister Prawit Wongsuwon told that the military is planning to form a new unit to counter this online dissent apparently.
I think Thailand is definitely one country that is not heading towards democracy, no matter what their prime minister has promised them. And when it comes to dissent itself, whether it's online or not online, I think it's hard in a world these days. You know, it's the 21st century and it's a globalized world, and it's really hard to have a country where you have zero dissent. Of course, people are definitely going to voice when their dissatisfaction. They're going to talk about what they're not happy about. They're going to criticize the government. These are things that you just cannot stop anymore. And for Thailand to come up with a new military unit just to curb this dissent doesn't really make sense. I mean, what's the best that they can do is actually listen to what these people are saying, and they can maybe set certain limits, but to curb it all by itself, I don't think that is actually possible.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. We are living in the world of having all this online all the time. And even like all the cyber space is so popular nowadays, even in the younger generations. And then we are using more devices to access to that. So having this is something that it's a questionable, especially to Thailand and also people there.
And I think this announcement came because of a lot of concerns recently that people have been posting stuff about the royal family is sort of defaming them, and a lot of prosecutions are happening as well.
Right.
And that's why they came up with this whole law. And they also said that they would trace and arrest all these attackers, they call it, cyber attackers who attack the government. And I think this goes to show that Thailand's monarchy is still protected by one of the world's strictest majestic laws, with most new cases brought over perceived insults online. And I think when it comes to Thailand, there's just no saying anything about the royal family.
So there will be another Sedition Act in Thailand. Well, that's it for our news on the political side. Well, stay tuned. After this break, we'll come back on the economic side of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and the foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. You're still at ASEAN Dailies, where we deliver news from Southeast Asia, and you're with Grace.
And you're with Gowri.
Right, let's talk about the economic news, and let's focus on the SMEs as well as, of course, ASEAN Economic Integration and the community here. Well, apparently Singapore has shown something towards the SMEs, and when it comes to ASEAN Economic Community, apparently they are not so keen to collaborate with other regional counterpart in expanding in Southeast Asia.
Yes, a lot of these SMEs are actually quite skeptical about whether or not the ASEAN Economic Community vision can fully realize. And I know that Grace, you yourself, you're not really a big fan of the AEC. You always say that it's quite an ambitious project that it may not even be realistic for us to achieve by next year.
Yeah. Well, that's because it seems that it was very rushed, all these plans, and yet not many people are really aware of what's going on, and then the details and the information that which are given so far to the public. It's just a very small little bit of all those pieces that we can gather, but we don't have the whole picture yet how all these SMEs and even other business can benefit from ASEAN Economic Community.
I think the talks itself has been ongoing for quite a few years, but the thing is, it was never really given much attention, or it was not really in the spotlight. But only this year, suddenly everyone knows about this,
Boosted
and they're
up,
like, what's going on with the AEC, and how exactly can we benefit from this? And the biggest questioners are, of course, the SMEs, who actually happen to be the most important part when it comes to realizing the AEC, because we want this small and medium enterprises to grow and to not just think local, but also think of how they can go regional. I think one of the best example given by Tony Fernandez was his nasi lemak that's being sold on board. It was it was actually by a very, very small enterprise that he decided, because he believes in ASEAN so much that he decided to package that in a way that it reaches out to everyone on the plane.
Yeah.
You can be from 10 or 20 different countries. And I think what's happening in Singapore right now, based on the survey they conducted, is that a lot of these companies are probably still in the dark, or they're not too clear about how exactly they can leverage from the AEC and make this whole thing work for them. Because for them, it's just another governmental term, something big, something enormous, and it may not exactly include the SMEs.
Exactly. Well, that's why based on the data from Singapore, about half of SMEs had a revenue from the overseas last year, a slight improvement from 46% in 2013. One reason is fear that all those bureaucratic roadblocks will remain in place, and even after this ASEAN Economic Community takes effect on this whole community as well as the business. Which is, I can totally agree with that, because when it comes to business, you cannot ignore this bureaucratic system in the one society or even in the community. So will ASEAN Economic Community or even the integration will make things better for every single person?
Right. I think I agree with you. That's a very valid concern for them to have, because it's not easy to just go into another country and set up your business there. As much as the AEC will be looking at low tariff and decreasing the barriers, but there's a lot more complications that take place when it comes to when it comes to setting up your business in another country. And one of it is when it comes to banking, when it comes to financing. What's the procedure in the other country, and how exactly are you going to establish your market over there? So I think that what the government should do in every country, or even together, is to come up with ways that is actually simplified, easy for people to understand, and to show all these SMEs on how exactly can they make use of the AEC.
Exactly. I think that's most important. When it comes to business, it's not only about those high income class that we're talking about. We have to consider a whole community from lower class, middle class, and high class, and they need to feel the inclusiveness when it comes to ASEAN Economic Community. So hope that, it will be conclude anytime soon, but then hope that we as a whole generations and also the community will be able to understand the term, and then also be able to benefit from all this businesses. Well, while we are pretty concerned about the ASEAN Economic Community, but then there are still many other countries they would love to look into Southeast Asia for investment, and one of them is still China, and they have putting their eyes on in Laos with $31 billion of investment.
Yes, and with $31 billion, we're looking at least 240 projects that will start taking place in the southwestern province of Yunnan, according to Laos. And Laos is of course a poor and remote, traditionally been in the orbit of its larger neighbor Vietnam. It's not really been gaining much attention, but China actually sees Laos as a very good potential for them to come in and to start investing and to set up companies. It also feels like Laos is actually an important route for them to get into Southeast Asia, especially because of its ports for landlocked parts of southwestern China, such as Yunnan, like I mentioned. It did not really specify about where the money will come from or how much exactly they have given, but this is the plan so far as of now.
Yeah, and at the same time, regional Chinese government often announce headline-grabbing figures for schemes that are either only partially realized or abandoned. However, last year, China offered more than $20 billion in loans, and also they helped the Southeast Asia to improve the infrastructure and for the other projects, which is very true. When it comes to Southeast Asia infrastructure, it seems endless issues, especially Laos, Indonesia, even the Philippines.
I think what China is doing is great. Whether or not they give the money to Laos, that's a different story. But instead of looking at a country as poor and remote, and I don't know, good for nothing. I think it's great that China looks at it from a different perspective, that this market is untapped and no one has really explored it. So it'll be good for China to step in and to invest the money and make use of the untapped potential that's there.
So we'll take another short break. When we come back, let's talk about the arts and culture part of Southeast Asia.
ASEAN Dailies. First and foremost news from Southeast Asia.
Welcome back to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. You're with Grace.
Hi, this is Gowri.
And we are still at our ASEAN Dailies. We've delivered news from Southeast Asia. So let's focus on the arts and culture part here. And apparently social media has been, booming up with this particular person,
like
all the
exploding.
way from Canada. And of course the whole world welcomes the new Canadian PM. So not really so much about his background or who he is in person. Whole social media is going viral because of his hair and his looks.
Exactly. And he's also been dubbed as Canada's super hot new leader.
Exactly.
And of course this comes in line with the elections that they recently had, and he actually managed to beat Stephen Harper and got elected as the new Prime Minister. Yeah, right. Yeah. And he just shot to fame like within a couple of hours because of how hot he is. And they also said that this is the probably the only Canadian election that got so much of attention all around the world.
And also his name is Justin Trudeau, and because of his sensational hairstyle, a lot of people have been making a lot of memes and also posts regarding about his hair. Well, but the sources are very diverse as politic.com.eu and also Scientific American hypothesized that Mr. Trudeau, once in office, might play a more constructive role than his predecessor during the final weeks of the negotiation. In fact, Justin is a son of a former prime minister in Canada, so that's why a lot of people also have a better hope for this new elected prime minister for Canada.
Right, and just to give a little bit of background, he actually wrote a late surge to a stunning majority election victory on Monday, toppling their Prime Minister Stephen Harper from the Conservative Party with a promise of change and returning a touch of glamour, youth and charisma to Ottawa.
Wow.
How is that? And of course Stephen Harper had to concede defeat, and his Conservative Party announced his resignation as well, ending a 9-year run in power. And also his brand of fiscal and cultural conservatism, I think, is not that popular among the young people anymore. What they want now is something more liberal, something more forward, and they don't really want to stick to the the conservative values in Canada. And according to Trudeau, he said, "My friends, we beat fear with hope. We beat cynicism with hard work. We beat negative, divisive politics with a positive vision that brings all Canadians together. And this is what positive politics can do."
Wow, words, I tell you. Well, of course, he's pretty young at being a prime minister in Canada, but with his passion and also the vision that he has for one nation, hope that he can he doesn't need to disappoint the public anymore, but then bring the better vision and the police work together.
I think it's about time that we have a young prime minister because, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. People can either think that somebody who is old and experienced is good, or you can look at it as somebody who's young, someone who has fresh ideas.
And also passionate.
Instead of just being inexperienced. I think he's probably more in touch with what the younger people want, and the youth are the future of the country anyway. So this will be an interesting change for us to observe as well, to see how such a young prime minister is going to change the country.
Exactly. I mean, of course, we need to see whether like 3 months, 6 months, and also a year. But then hope the Southeast Asia, perhaps we can, take this example as an example to learn from it in the future.
But before we move on, I must add that a lot of people have been criticizing him, saying that he has more style and looks than substance, that he's just another pretty face. So I'm really looking forward to see within the next few months what are the changes that he's going to bring about to Canada.
Yep. Definitely. So let's move on to the next news, which is about the Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. Well, personally, I will still go for Coca-Cola. How about you, Gowri?
Well, I'm actually not quite a fan of soft drink. I drink anything that has the word zero in it, whether it's Pepsi Zero or Coke Zero. But I think the main issue here is, I think the battle between Coke and Pepsi has been going on for quite some time. I think since I was a kid, when Coca-Cola comes up with an advertisement, and then Pepsi uses Britney Spears and Beyonce and come up with something more fun, more exciting. But I think in this case, they are fighting for a few countries at stake here. For example, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, who are the CLMV countries. And it seems that Coca-Cola, although Pepsi has been there since 1971, and now Coca-Cola is trying to take over the market. Shouldn't be too difficult for them to do that.
Yeah, Coca-Cola is already a established company, and then all these popular street stalls in Vientiane, the capital of Laos, there are increasing number of customers. They are ordering these plastic bottles of Coca-Cola along with meals. So it's becoming quite popular in Southeast Asia as well, which is good news. However, it's lively the Pepsi. Yeah.
It's not good news for Pepsi.
Exactly.
Be a little sensitive. So I mean, Pepsi has been there. They have been controlling 90% of the market in Laos all this while. So it might be a bit difficult for them to deal with the fact that Coca-Cola is coming in now and competing with them.
This is the reality. Accept it. Well, we can come up with a better concept and move on for sure.
Like what? A new soft drink?
Right. So that's it for our news commentary this morning on Wednesday. Well, stay tuned for the next interview at our Durian Heat. And we can find our podcast on our social media on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and also we have our Instagram. So look for more content via social media, as well as we have a website, durianasean.com.
And of course, you can always look for us on the TuneIn app as well on your mobile phones, or you can also download our very own Durian ASEAN app, and you can listen to us wherever you are.